Be sure to hop on over to the Spiritual Broadcast Network. It's the go-to place for all things spiritual. You'll discover internet television shows that you won't find anywhere else. You can also choose from hundreds of hours of spiritual documentaries and movies. You'll enjoy on-demand and live internet television programming 24/7. Best of all, we add new dramas, comedies, talk, and reality shows and more on a daily basis. So why spend countless hours searching the web when you can quickly find just what you want on the Spiritual Broadcast Network? Good evening. Welcome to the Vortex Sarasota Show. I'm your host, George Lewis. I've got a really exciting, powerful show for us tonight. My guest is Dorothy Ann Jackson. Dorothy is a Unity Minister and the wife of a Unity Minister. And we're going to talk tonight about her journey in finding herself and finding her power. And it's been quite a journey. We're going to have a great time tonight. Welcome, Dorothy.
Thank you, George.
Yeah, I'm really pleased to have you tonight. Our conversation earlier was very stimulating. You're great to talk with.
Thank you.
You know, with all those years of experience that you have and all of the depth of what your spiritual journey has been, very powerful, and powerful to be around. So believe me, your journey to power, it's come to fruition. It comes through and it shows.
I do want to say that when I use the word power, I always want to know that the greatest power is love itself. So when I speak of power, that's what I'm referring to.
Well, and we have to have power to love, because it takes power. It takes very little power to hate.
Yes.
But it takes real power to love.
Yes.
You know? So let's go back. Let's talk about your childhood so we can give our viewers some idea of where you came from and what's happened and what your journey has been like.
I grew up in a small town, Bedford, Virginia, nestled in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Parkway. And there were two mountains called the Peaks of Otter. They were just beautiful. So it was an idyllic place and an idyllic setting.
Right.
And it was in the early 30s. It was in the time when the male was head of the household. The woman stayed home, kept that house spick and span, and kept those kids just in line. And well, it was not a lot of keeping them in line because life then was quite different from today.
Whole different world,
played up and down the whole block, you know. Daytime, nighttime, never, ever having to be concerned about anything other than other parents right there if we needed them.
Right.
You know? So it was a beautiful time of just children playing together, loving together, enjoying life. And the parents would sit on the front porches at night and chat while we played with the lightning bugs, catching them in jars and hide and seek and things like that. It was a time when it was pre-World War II.
Right.
So things were still idyllic before the war came on. And I was blessed to be in that time. It was an innocent time, I think. We had the values that were there that came from our church and the community. And then there were always the wonderful Saturday movies that had their influence. Now, I grew
Outdoor
up...
movies?
Pardon?
Outdoor movies?
No, this was the regular little movie theater.
Gotcha.
That
Okay.
you'd go to. We had the home movies also that you would wind and show The Crazy Cat
Right.
and Charlie Chaplin, some of those.
Right.
But the movies on Saturday, which was when we would go, because that was Mother's Day to cook, to be ready for the big day of Sunday,
Right.
all right? So we went to the movies, and it was always cowboys. I mean, this was not a cowboy town, but we were exposed to cowboys. And Gene Autry was fading out, and Roy Rogers was taking his place, this handsome young man. And the neat thing was that he had a sidekick named Dale Evans.
Absolutely.
And she had her own horse and rode beside him, and they would always do some good deed together, conquer evil, and they'd ride off in the sunset side by side together, both having their same horse, and riding into the sunset, singing, "Happy trails to you."
Happy trails.
We loved that. But that was a little conflicting with my fairy tale image.
Did you feel that on a conscious level, or was that just
Not then.
kind
It's
of
looking
subtle?
back.
I got it.
It was very subtle because I grew up playing with a bride doll and just knew that I would find my Prince Charming,
Absolutely.
ride off on that white stallion with him and live happily ever after. That's how the fairy tales were. So that was there.
Well, how did your parents get along? Did they give you this kind of exemplary?
You know, I don't know where it came from.
I got you.
It was just a part of me.
Yep.
Could have been just, I carried a lot of feminine energy. It could just be a part of that. Daddy was a manager of the one department store in town and worked all the time. Mother was, again, the at-home, taking care of 5 kids in the family. Daddy, after work, would go to the bar, the one bar in town, and had some challenge with alcohol.
Alcohol. I got you.
So that created an evening time that was not quite so fun to look at.
Was he abusive?
No, it was mainly with Mother that the arguments would be there.
So it's the emotional, mental abuse.
Yes.
I got you.
So that was the only thing that deterred this beautiful, idyllic childhood.
Right.
But it had its impact also.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So you left there and went to college?
Yeah, I was very blessed. The teachers were sort of looking over me because I'd done quite well in school. I actually started out writing a lot of essays and winning awards, that type of thing. So the teachers wanted to make sure I got through college. Family could not afford it, of course. So they saw to it that I got a teacher's scholarship, and then I worked in the dining hall to work my way through school.
So you worked your way through. You didn't have
Yes.
any help from your family?
You know, I look back, I wonder how I did it. I don't
Absolutely.
know, because all the money from the working went right into the tuition, so I don't know. Spending money must have been the little $10 that Mother would get off to me.
But
Not
but
much.
even at that, when you compare today,
Oh,
with
my.
that, you were able to work your way through college.
Yes.
Today, you have to debt your way through college, and they make us debtors.
Yes. Well, there was a debt, the teacher's scholarship. I had to sign a contract that I would teach, or else be sure to work and pay that back. If you worked, you didn't have to pay it back.
Okay.
That was the payment. But if you didn't work, and then my children came along quickly after we were married, so I didn't want to work, but I had to, was forced to get that scholarship paid off.
So was your main goal to get an education or Prince Charming?
Well, both were there.
Right
Both
together,
were there.
huh?
And so off in college, right after my freshman year, I was president of the Baptist Student Union there on college, so they paid for my way to camp for a week at a Ridgecrest. It's called a spiritual retreat where college students would go for a week. And I fell in love with the Alabama students and just spent all my time, though I was from Virginia, spent all my time with them and just had a great relationship. So after my sophomore year, same thing, I went again. Now, in high school, I had dated quite a bit, but never found my Prince Charming. In fact, just where lots of girls were going steady, I never did that.
Town boys never quite measured up for you.
Right. But that year, after my second year in college, yes, at this spiritual retreat, this man was with the Alabama students. I'm greeting all my friends from previous year, and all of a sudden I see him. My heart stood still. Oh, my goodness. Now, he nudges his friend and says, "That's the girl I'm going to marry."
Isn't that interesting?
It was like, boing, we knew. Now, what we didn't know was that what we knew on a deeper level was that we had a lot to learn from
All
each
your
other.
stuff just kind of was magnetic, right?
It was magnetic. So what would turn out to be is that I was the ultimate feminine. I carried a feminine challenge. I worked with numerology, and my chart would show that I carried the feminine challenge, which is ultra-sensitive. And my husband, who would be the man who would be my husband, carried the masculine challenge. So he was way over to one extreme, too macho. I was way over to the other extreme, too feminine. So when these two meet up, wow, it was like we hardly knew each other. We just knew we were meant to be together. We met and knew each other. It took him a few days before he approached me for a date because he and his friend had agreed, no girls. We're going for spiritual reasons.
Great contract, that.
Yeah. So it took a few days. So we knew each other 4 days there. We wrote to each other. We're back in college, writing to each other. He asked to come to my home for Christmas. He proposed. Easter of that year, next year, my brother took me to Alabama to meet his parents, and in June of that year, we were married. I married right after my junior year in college. However, I did return to finish my senior year as a married woman, and he entered seminary in North Carolina and came up on weekends. So things have now arrived. My Prince Charming was there, and the children came along, 3 children, and got caught up in life. But again, he's making all the decisions. He's the one in charge. That's what I grew up with. He's the head of the household. And though I did enter the teaching field, I was an art major to begin with, and later went back and did the education. So I taught in the years when I had to, but when it wasn't necessary, he didn't want me working.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely. Got to be home.
That's right. He's
Have
the
babies.
controlling one. And bit by bit, I later came to realize I was giving my power away.
Right.
Totally merging emotionally with this man. I was like one with him on an emotional level. But I still functioned. And for years, in fact, this would go on for 34 years.
Well, it seems like the right thing to do when we're in the middle of it, doesn't it?
Yes. And
even
though
there are challenges, it's still, it seems
what
like...
else do you do?
Right.
You see, my mother was caught up in that era when women did not work. She had nothing else. She had to. She was forced to stay.
Right.
Now, I have that ability to make my money, but still I'm following that same pattern that my mother had.
Right.
Yes, staying in the relationship, no matter how miserable it was, yes.
So, but one of the good things about this is you started to have some pretty strong realizations.
Yes, yes.
Can you take us through some of those?
Yes. Well, I came to realize that I was certainly giving my power away, that I didn't know who I was.
Right.
And that was not a good feeling. But again, continued to live with it. I got more miserable and more miserable and more miserable.
In that process of giving your power away and not knowing who you are, did your husband, did he not know who he was, or did he have a real...
He knew exactly who he was. He was in charge. He was the in charge person. In charge of family, yes.
Uh-huh.
That was who he was. And that's what he knew.
Well, but the thing that kind of like makes me wonder a bit, if you're, like you've given your power away and you're just finding out who you are, then if he's in charge, then something has to change over here.
Yes.
So maybe he didn't know who he was.
At that time, no. It took my being so miserable that something had to be done, and that something that I did was to take a trip to Egypt. I saw a flyer about a group of people, healers, going to Egypt. There were going to be 300 or more. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was to be there.
Oh, really?
It was going to be a wonderful thing. But some trouble broke out in that area, and everybody was backing out. Only 33 people remained. I thought they would cancel it, but they did not.
Uh-huh.
It was still on, so I found myself making my own money to pay for the ticket. As I talked to you earlier, having two young men in the family as our sons and a husband who wanted to do everything, I did not learn how to get around. I couldn't read road signs. I didn't know how to get about.
Never needed to do that.
Never needed to. So this was traumatic for me to take this trip alone and to be in an airport in a foreign country where I would have to change planes. And it was traumatic, but I did it.
Yeah,
and I found myself in Egypt. And we were at the Manor House, which is right across from the little town of Giza.
Uh-huh.
You can stand on the balcony and see the pyramids.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah. So right up the road from this manor house, a beautiful resort there, you get onto the desert and you walk a little ways and the pyramids are there. It's right in a civilized area. There's only one area that you can really take a picture where the pyramids look like they're forever in the desert. There's only one view there. Actually, they're very close to the little town.
Right in the middle of everything.
So my roommate that first night had her boyfriend on the trip also, and they had ridden Arabian horses on the desert. And the next night, that very day when I was talking to her, they were going to climb the pyramid on the night of the full moon. It was 1991. There would be a blue moon, two moons in that month. It's called the blue moon. I said, oh, may I go with you? Yes. Well, they had bribed a guard to meet them at the top of that hillside at 11 o'clock that night. So we dressed fairly warmly because the wind was blowing. It was in the 70s. And we met the guide, and he took us to his home, and he lived in the apartment complex that the government has built for the more nomadic people. And he opened the first door, which was the camel and donkey, and then into his house. It was connected to his house. And the sister served us tea. He wanted to wait until the moon was at a certain point because he wanted that moon to be right over the pyramid when we got there. So he read us letters from other people who had
their experiences.
Yes. So that left us at ease with him. And so as we were going out the door, the lights in his house went out, and that's when we panicked. Oh, my goodness.
Oh, yeah.
Something's going to happen here. But he assured us, no, and he had a flashlight ready. They just share the electricity. So we walked on to the pyramid through the sand in the dark, and the moon was beautiful. We get to the pyramid, and the stones were pretty high, and we've got to climb them.
Oh, really?
Climb those stones, all right? There are no steps. There are steps going up when you go into the pyramid.
Right.
The entranceway, steps for that. But we were just climbing the big blocks.
From there to blocks.
Right, big blocks.
That's quite an experience.
So we started climbing, and I got up about a third of the way, and something in me said I could not go any further.
Oh, really?
I had to tell him, I can't do it.
Was it physical or
It was
emotional?
a mental thing. I had read a book by Dr. Brew Joy, and he said when he got to the top, he felt this urge to throw himself off.
Brew Joy did, huh?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know
in his
that
book,
about
Joy's Way.
Right.
He actually spent the night in that pyramid. He tells about that in the book. So I could not get that thought out of my head, and I said, I cannot go any further. So he found a space, a small space, on one of the corners of the pyramid, about a yard long, and he said, you stay here, we'll get you on the way back down. And suddenly I'm alone in the dark night. Oh, my goodness.
Terrified.
And I curled up like a little baby. I started crying, and suddenly I was out. The energy was so powerful.
So you had out of body.
I to this day do not know what happened, except that evidently inner knowledge was unfolded in me that would appear later. So they came back 45 minutes later.
So you just had a blank experience.
Absolutely.
Where you don't even know what.
Absolutely. But I went out. It was definitely a trance of some kind. So they told me that at the top, the capstone is not on the pyramid.
Right.
That the wind was whipping around when they got to the center. It was like the eye of the hurricane.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Still quiet. So I missed out and was so upset with myself that I hadn't done this. But evidently what happened needed to happen. I was alone with myself, and things were going on in me. The next day we actually did go into the pyramid and visited the Queen's chamber and lay down in the sarcophagus in the King's chamber and all of that. And coming down, I saw the pit. Somehow I knew I had to do that. There were only two other people. It's a little hole about like this, a little cave-like hole, and you go down backwards holding onto the railings, looking under your arm, all curled up, going down.
Right.
And it goes into the innards of the pyramid. And when we got there, thank goodness, one of the others had a flashlight. And we realized we were in a cave about the size of this room. And in the center, another hole with a wrought-iron fence around it. And when we put the flashlight down, no, you couldn't see an end.
Bottomless is what it looked like.
Bottomless pit, hole within the hole. Well, I didn't know why I had to do that. But again, both that experience and the being alone in the trance were important.
So was that kind of a metaphor for looking into that deep part of
It had to be a
yourself?
part of that. And also I learned later from Drunvalo Melchizedek that people who had been in the pit were having some unusual experiences, and they found that whatever intention you were going in with would manifest very quickly.
Uh-huh.
So my intention, in fact, it got so bad, they closed the pit a year later.
Really?
Yes. So my intention had been to find myself. So when I got home from that experience, it was like I knew, I had an inner knowing that Don was my mirror, and he was mirroring my own masculine side. It was very interesting that in Puerto Rico, many years earlier, we had lived in Puerto Rico. Don was a professor with Inter-American University there, and I taught art appreciation there. I had painted a picture of a nude female, and in her huge womb is a soldier in the foxhole.
Oh, wow.
He's all curled up with his hand on his helmet, and I didn't know why. It was a very strong, very large and strong painting. People who usually saw it thought a man had done that.
Right.
So that went under my bed. I carried it around for years and kept it under the bed. It would be years before I would realize
Your own masculine self.
that's what it was all about.
Uh-huh.
Yes, that was my own masculine wanting to come up, to be born. And
How did you feel about that as far as, like, okay, this has been down here all these years, now I'm going to let it out?
It felt good. It felt really good
empowering
because
then.
all of a sudden I am strong, and I realized my precious husband was not liking me very much anymore.
I bet. I'm sure of that, yeah.
And then I wasn't liking myself. My feminine side wasn't liking me. And that's when I came to the realization it's not either or. It's
balance, isn't it?
embracing both sides and holding them out in awareness. So I realized we live in a world of duality, and that's one of the ultimate dualities, the masculine and feminine. And Jesus talks a great deal about that when he talks about the weddings and the feast at the weddings, and the coming together of the masculine and feminine in us represents the coming together of the soul and the higher spirit.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was very powerful for me. So whenever Dawn and I would get into our stuff, I would always say, honey, it's my stuff.
Uh-huh.
And I would try to be alone with myself, an image in my mind that I was holding a masculine and a feminine baby. And at that time, I would not be feeling real loved because I knew he was out here. But I would hear my own masculine, my little baby boy, say to my little girl, I love you. And then I would say to both of them, I love you.
Yeah.
So I worked to that quite a bit. But for 3 years, I would say to Don, it's my stuff. And bit by bit, I knew that I could not change him. I could only work on me. And through the years now, Don has moved into his more feminine aspect.
Right.
And finding more balance within himself. So we're both, it never ends.
Well,
Don't
that's
get me
for
wrong.
sure, isn't
It
it?
never ends. It's a process where you are forever working on this, keeping both in awareness. And all of life is like that. Everything has its polarity. We live in this world of duality. The whole universe, the physics of the universe is set up on this duality. When God said, let there be light, and it says the light shined in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. The light and the
Absolutely.
dark, the total opposites there. So everything is set up on duality, but our journey is to bring them into focus. So we all have a dark shadow of whatever is hidden in ourselves is projected outwardly, and life is a mirror. I got into the work of Walter Russell at one time.
Uh-huh.
And he tells us he's far ahead of the scientific world. He has such knowledge there. He had trances every 7 years until he was 49 years old. And then all of the information that had been encoded for him came out. He sequestered himself and began writing.
Right.
He has the book, The Secret of Light, The Universal One, just some wonderful books. You can still find him.
Is he an artist also?
What?
Other than a writing, does he have other art?
Oh, yes.
He got like, he would do
he was
3
the
hours
sculptor,
of this and then...
Yes.
I'm very
Marvelous
familiar with-
sculptor, painter.
Yeah.
He was every field of life he mastered.
Absolutely. And
He was a true master of life itself.
he could focus for a couple hours here and focus over here
Yes.
a couple hours.
Both brain hemispheres, the left and the right, were functioning. And his scientific work that he gave to the world, one of the things he says is that all of life is a mirror.
Right.
We exist in the God mind. The God mind projects outwardly. We're projections of the God mind, and we mirror back to God through these 9 mirrors.
See, I've often thought, well, we read that man was made in God's image, and I think, well, maybe we were made in God's imagination.
That's it. That's one of the greatest powers that we have.
Absolutely.
Is the imagination, because now we too, existing in the God mind, have a mind like that, which now projects its creations outwardly. But if we're not in touch with our dark shadow, we project that outwardly.
Right.
And everything mirrors back to us through these mirrors of the universe what is in us. So if we're not in touch with what's hidden within us, then we judge it in another. And that's why Jesus said, judge not that you be not judged. For the measure with which you judge is the measure you're going to get back with
Coming
judgment.
back for sure.
Yeah. So this was, I had judged Don's strong side.
Uh-huh.
And I had not liked it. And so I had to find it's in me. Yes, it's in me. Everything we're disliking in another person is in us. It can be just a hint of something in that outer world, and it will magnify in us this big because it's trying to show us it's in us. And that's why Jesus said, why do you look at the splinter in your brother's eye when there's a 2x4 sticking out of your own?
Right? Well, there's the other side of that too.
Okay.
So when I finally came to that, whatever that I'm the thing that's in me, I want to put on you, so nobody sees it in me.
Right.
But what's good in you that I recognize is also in me.
Absolutely.
So both things.
Absolutely. That's why. Most of us love people who carry the feminine energy. The feminine energy is sweet and kind and loving, and we love to be with people like that.
Sure.
Now, the masculine side is more about the outer world, and it's strong and assertive, pioneer, leadership. But the problem is people have challenges in that. One challenge in numerology will show it'll get too strong.
Right.
And so when two people who have that number one challenge come in contact, they're going to mirror, and the sparks will fly.
Big force.
One will be the controller, one the controlled, or vice versa.
Right.
Back and forth it will go. So that's powerful to begin to see that. So it's easy to see the people who are loving and kind. So we see that more feminine side of ourselves, and we love that.
Absolutely.
But we tend to not like the masculine.
Yep.
And
we've had some experiences with the masculine, starting out with Dad.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So embracing that within myself. And it's all about acceptance, accepting these parts of me, bringing them into focus and keeping them in awareness. Once they're aware, once you recognize something in yourself, it's out there.
Absolutely.
It's no longer hidden. And that's what we want to do. Our ego has to know this, that it has served us well all these years, and we need to talk to it in a loving way. It's served us well, but the time will come when it's going to have to sacrifice.
Yep.
And the sacrifice is looking at itself, looking at those parts that did not keep up that pretense that we wanted to show to the world.
Right.
Those parts were hidden. That's our mask. So those parts were hidden. So the ego has to reach a place where it can accept those hidden, rejected, ugly, negative parts of ourselves.
They're there.
They are there, and it's very emotional. But when the ego can make the sacrifice of accepting those parts, guess what's going to happen? It's going to be lifted into a place where it's going to be given a power of being in charge, and not in charge, but it will represent the totality of our personality. It will be in a place of supremacy and power, but the power is love, remember?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's a beautiful thing happening for it, yeah.
Well, you know what I've found is that the joy is a byproduct of right use of power.
That's good.
And when I do everything I need to do to keep myself in a state of joy, I'm spiritually balanced.
Absolutely.
And this, my experience with this dark side, when I first recognized it, it was like, oh wow, this is like, you have the head knowledge. Then learn to live with it. That's where the trick comes in, and that really takes some honest, open willingness.
But Jesus gives the parable of it tells about Jesus. It's not a parable, it's a story in the New Testament. Jesus invites the disciples, let's cross over the waters.
Right.
And then Jesus goes to sleep, and the ego takes over. The disciples take over, you see.
Right.
And then the huge storm comes, the rain, the waves. They think they're going to perish. Jesus, wake up, we're going to perish. And Jesus stands up and says to the water and the rains, peace, be still. All right. That represents the invitation from our Christ nature to cross those waters of the unconscious.
Right.
Cross over those waters. But then the ego takes over. I can do this. I'll
take care of this,
But when it gets so bad and so emotional, the turbulent waters of the emotions come up, the storm of that's when the ego realizes or thinks it's going to be drowned in the unconscious. It thinks it's going to be extinguished and annihilated, and that's when it turns to the inner Christ nature, that divinity in you, and begs for help.
Absolutely.
That's when it happens.
Got to be brought to its knees.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then it will see that beautiful divine nature in us has the power to still those storms and bring the calm and peace that we need.
There's actually a place in us that we can come to where we meet calamity with serenity.
I like that.
Which is very, very powerful, isn't it?
Yes.
So we're out of time. Is there any kind of last thing that we've missed you'd like to really?
When I realized, remember my Roy Rogers?
Yes.
Okay, that imprinted really strongly. I'm no longer on the white horse.
Right.
Okay, but happy trails to you. One day, Don and I pulled out of our home in separate cars, had different places to go to, and we were on University Boulevard heading toward the west. The sun was setting in the west, and we sort of pulled up side by side, and all of a sudden that picture of Dale Evans and Roy Rogers riding their horses side by side into the sunset. Oh my goodness, I realized I've arrived. I've got my own horse.
The feelings must have been overwhelming.
I've got my own power in me to be who I need to be and to know who I am.
That's phenomenal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. It makes it worth all the trouble.
Yeah. So happy trails.
Happy trails. Listen, thank you for coming in and taking your time.
Thank you for asking.
You've been lovely.
George.
It's been a great journey. What a story. And I'm just sure that there are going to be many, many people who benefit from these ideas that you've put here. There are so many women who are caught in this, so many men who are caught in this. Because the man has his own prison in the middle of keeping you in prison.
That's right.
And it's freedom for all of us. So thank you.
Thank you, George.
It's been a great visit.
Thank you.
Well, that's we've had a great night tonight. I hope you've enjoyed as much as I have.
I have.
Great.
I've been very comfortable. I hope I kept my voice down.
No, you did just perfect. So be sure to come back next week. I have a great guest next week. And in the meantime, don't forget to accentuate the positive and have a fantastic week. Be sure to hop on over to the Spiritual Broadcast Network. It's the go-to place for all things spiritual. You'll discover internet television shows that you won't find anywhere else. You can also choose from hundreds of hours of spiritual documentaries and movies. You'll enjoy on-demand and live internet television programming 24/7. Best of all, we add new dramas, comedies, talk, and reality shows and more on a daily basis. So why spend countless hours searching the web when you can quickly find just what you want on the Spiritual Broadcast Network?